The morning sun filtered through the crystal spires of the Galactic Education Consortium headquarters on Nexus Station, casting rainbow patterns across the marble floors. 3 beings sat in comfortable silence in the orientation chamber, each lost in their own thoughts about the adventure that awaited them. Roth adjusted his crystalline frame, the light refracting through his translucent body in nervous flickers. Beside him, Nira's leaf-like appendages rustled softly as she absorbed the artificial sunlight streaming through the windows. Tam floated in his mobility suit, his aquatic form gracefully moving through the specially designed water chamber that kept him comfortable in the station's atmosphere. They had all volunteered for the same program, the Universal Student Exchange initiative designed to foster understanding between the galaxy's many species. Their destination was a small blue-green world in the Outer Rim territories, inhabited by a relatively new species that had recently achieved faster-than-light communication. The planet was called Earth, and its dominant species called themselves humans. Kynn, the Altarian administrator, entered the chamber with his usual measured pace. His tall, gray form moved with the dignity expected of someone who had overseen cultural exchanges for over 3 centuries. He carried a datapad containing the final briefing materials, though the information was relatively sparse. Earth had only been in contact with the galactic community for 2 standard years, and their application for the exchange program had been straightforward if somewhat primitive. "The transport will arrive shortly," Kin announced, his voice carrying the slight harmonic resonance typical of his species. "I trust you have all reviewed the preliminary cultural data?" The 3 students nodded in unison. They had studied the available information extensively, though it was limited. Humans appeared to be a bipedal species with a relatively short lifespan, living on a world with standard atmospheric composition and gravitational parameters. Their technology was adequate for basic space travel, and they had demonstrated peaceful intentions in their initial contact protocols. The journey to Earth took 3 standard days aboard the educational vessel Harmony. The ship's AI provided additional briefings during the voyage, but the information remained frustratingly basic. Humans seemed to live in organized settlements, had developed various forms of art and literature, and maintained complex social structures. Nothing particularly unusual for a developing species. When they finally arrived at Earth, the orbital approach offered their first real glimpse of their destination. The planet was undeniably beautiful, with swirling white clouds, vast blue oceans, and continents covered in green and brown patches. Several artificial structures orbited the world, primitive but functional space stations that served as Earth's interface with the galactic community. The landing shuttle brought them to a facility called New Geneva University, located in what humans called Switzerland. The campus was spread across a valley surrounded by massive geological formations that humans apparently called mountains. The buildings were a mixture of old stone structures and newer glass constructions, creating an interesting blend of architectural styles. Their first human contact was a middle-aged male named Professor Alan Thompson, who served as the university's xenobiology department head. He was shorter than the average galactic humanoid, with brown hair that was beginning to show signs of aging and eyes that seemed to hold a perpetual expression of curiosity. He wore simple clothing that appeared to be made from organic fibers, and his manner was both welcoming and refreshingly direct. "Welcome to Earth," he said, extending his hand in what they had learned was a human greeting gesture. "I hope your journey was comfortable. We're excited to have you here as part of our exchange program." The aliens took turns carefully performing the handshake ritual, noting the surprising strength in Alan's grip and the warmth of his skin. Humans, it seemed, maintained their body temperature at a level that would be considered feverish by most galactic standards. Yet Alan showed no signs of distress or illness. As they walked across the campus, Alan began what he called an orientation tour. He spoke casually about the university's history, the local climate, and the academic programs available to exchange students. It was during this seemingly innocent conversation that the first warning signs appeared. The weather's been particularly nice this week, Alan mentioned, gesturing toward the bright yellow star overhead. Though you'll want to be careful about sun exposure. Our primary star emits quite a bit of ultraviolet radiation which can damage cellular structures if you're not properly protected. The three aliens exchanged glances. Dangerous stellar radiation was typically a cause for immediate evacuation protocols, yet Alan spoke of it as a minor inconvenience. When they asked about protective measures, he simply pointed to his exposed skin and explained that humans had evolved natural shielding called melanin, and that many of his species actually sought out this radiation for something called recreational tanning. The next revelation came when Alan began discussing Earth's atmosphere. He explained with casual pride that their air contained approximately 21% oxygen, a concentration that would be considered toxic by most galactic safety standards. Not only did humans survive in this corrosive environment, but they required it for their biological processes. Without this dangerous gas, they would die within minutes. Roth's crystalline form began to dim with stress as he realized he was breathing what his species would classify as a mild poison. Neera's photosynthetic patches started to turn pale as the oxidizing atmosphere slowly affected her cellular structure. Tam retreated deeper into his mobility suit, grateful for the filtered environment that protected him from the hostile air. But Alan was far from finished with his casual recitation of Earth's hazards. He began describing what he called the planet's dynamic geology, explaining how the surface was divided into massive plates that moved constantly, sometimes causing catastrophic events called earthquakes. He mentioned weather systems that could generate winds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour, precipitation that could flood entire regions, and temperature variations that could freeze or boil water. Of course, we've learned to adapt to most of these conditions, Alan said, with the same tone one might use to discuss a minor scheduling conflict. Humans are remarkably resilient. Would you like to see your dormitory rooms? I think you'll find them quite comfortable. As they walked toward the residential buildings, the aliens began to process what they had learned. They had come to Earth expecting to study a primitive but peaceful species living on a standard habitable world. Instead, they had discovered beings who thrived in conditions that would challenge the most advanced survival equipment in the galaxy. The dormitory building was a pleasant structure, surrounded by what humans called gardens, areas where they deliberately cultivated other Earth organisms for aesthetic purposes. The aliens noted that even these decorative plants appeared to be engaged in complex chemical warfare, releasing compounds designed to attract some creatures while repelling others. Their rooms were comfortable by galactic standards, though the aliens couldn't help but notice that the windows offered no protection against the dangerous stellar radiation outside. Humans apparently lived their entire lives exposed to energy levels that would require shielding protocols on most civilized worlds. That evening, as they settled into their new environment, the three exchange students shared their initial impressions. They had expected to encounter a species that was perhaps slightly behind galactic norms in terms of technology and social development. Instead, they had met beings who casually discussed surviving in conditions that would eliminate most known life forms. Roth's crystalline form flickered with confusion as he tried to process how a species could evolve such extreme adaptations. Neera's leaves rustled nervously as she contemplated living for an entire semester in an oxidizing atmosphere. Tam floated in his mobility suit, grateful for the protection it provided against what was apparently a hostile environment. As they prepared their first reports to the Galactic Education Consortium, each of them struggled to find appropriate words to describe what they had discovered. Earth was not the peaceful garden world they had expected. It was something far more remarkable and terrifying, a world that had forged a species capable of thriving in conditions that would challenge the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. The humans, meanwhile, continued their daily lives with the same casual ease Alan had demonstrated, apparently unaware that they were living proof that life could flourish in the most impossible circumstances. Tomorrow would bring new classes, new experiences, and undoubtedly new revelations about the remarkable beings who called this deathworld home. The sound of an alarm pierced through the morning air at precisely 700 hours, causing the three alien students to jolt awake in their dormitory rooms. What they didn't realize was that this wasn't an emergency signal or evacuation warning, but rather what humans called an alarm clock, a device designed to forcibly interrupt their natural sleep cycles so they could maintain rigid daily schedules. Beth Rodriguez knocked on their doors 20 minutes later, her cheerful voice carrying through the corridors as she announced herself. She was a third-year undergraduate student who had volunteered to serve as their campus guide. A young human female with dark hair pulled back in what she called a ponytail and eyes that seemed to sparkle with constant amusement. Her clothing was practical and comfortable, designed for what she described as an active lifestyle. "Good morning, everyone," Beth called out as the aliens emerged from their rooms in various states of confusion and disorientation. "I hope you slept well. Today we're going to explore some of the campus facilities so you can get a feel for human student life." The first stop on their tour was something called the gymnasium, a large building filled with equipment that appeared to be designed for physical torture. Beth explained that humans use these devices to deliberately stress their bodies in order to make them stronger, a concept that seemed to violate every principle of intelligent behavior known to the galaxy. "This is the weight room," Beth said, gesturing toward a space where humans were engaging in what appeared to be ritualistic self-punishment. They were lifting heavy metal objects repeatedly, their faces contorted with effort and their bodies glistening with moisture that Beth explained was called sweat, a cooling mechanism that involved expelling bodily fluids through their skin. Roth's crystalline form flickered with disbelief as he watched a human male lift a barbell loaded with metal plates that weighed more than most sapient beings. The human's muscles strained against the weight, his breathing became labored, and his face turned red with exertion. Yet instead of stopping when pain became obvious, he continued until he reached some arbitrary number of repetitions, then smiled with satisfaction. "Why do they inflict damage upon themselves?" Roth asked, his translator struggling to convey the concept of voluntary suffering. "It's not really damage," Beth replied, though her explanation did little to clarify the situation. "When you stress muscle fibers, they rebuild themselves stronger than before. It's how we maintain physical fitness and build strength." The next area they visited was even more disturbing. Beth led them to a playing field where humans were engaged in something called rugby, a sport that seemed to combine elements of warfare with recreational activity. The participants threw themselves at each other with tremendous force, colliding in ways that would hospitalize most galactic species. When one player emerged with blood streaming from his nose, he simply tilted his head back and continued playing, as if nothing had happened. "This is considered entertainment?" Tam asked, his aquatic form trembling within his mobility suit. "Rugby is a great sport," Beth replied enthusiastically. "It builds teamwork, endurance, and mental toughness. The injuries are usually minor, and players learn to deal with pain and adversity." Nira's photosynthetic patches were turning pale green as she watched humans deliberately causing impact trauma to each other. "Your species finds violence enjoyable?" "It's not really violence," Beth explained. "It's controlled competition. There are rules and safety measures. Besides, a little rough play never hurt anyone." The irony of this statement was lost on Beth, who seemed genuinely puzzled by the aliens' horror at what she considered normal recreational activity. She led them to the cafeteria next, apparently unaware that she was about to subject them to even greater psychological trauma, the university. Dining hall was a large, bright space filled with the sounds of human conversation and the aroma of what Beth proudly called food. The aliens followed her through a serving line where humans were selecting from various dishes, many of which would register as toxic or dangerous on standard galactic food safety scanners. Beth filled her tray with items that included plant matter, soaked in acidic solutions, fermented dairy products that harbored living bacteria cultures, and something called hot sauce that measured over 50,000 Scoville units on the capsaicin scale. She then proceeded to consume these substances with obvious enjoyment, her body somehow neutralizing compounds that would trigger emergency medical responses in most species. Humans voluntarily consume toxins? Roth asked, his crystalline structure flickering with confusion. Capsaicin isn't really toxic to us, Beth replied, adding even more hot sauce to her meal. It just activates our pain receptors. The burn is actually pleasant once you get used to it. Some people build up tolerance to even stronger peppers. The aliens watched in fascination and horror as Beth followed her spicy meal with a glass of ice-cold liquid, subjecting her internal organs to thermal shock that would cause serious injury in most species. She then consumed carbonated beverages that released gas bubbles in her stomach, creating internal pressure that she relieved through a process called burping. The afternoon brought them to a chemistry laboratory where Professor Martinez was instructing students in the handling of substances that would require military-grade protective equipment on most civilized worlds. The humans worked with concentrated acids, reactive metals, and volatile compounds using nothing more than thin rubber gloves and transparent eye protection. On my homeworld, Nira whispered to her companions, these chemicals would require robotic handling and triple-sealed containment units. On my world, Roth replied, his form dimming with stress, possessing these substances would require authorization from the Planetary Defense Council. Tam remained silent, but his aquatic form had developed a nervous twitch that caused ripples throughout his mobility suit. He was beginning to understand that humans didn't just live on a dangerous world. They actively sought out hazardous situations and seemed to thrive on them. The chemistry students were performing experiments that involved controlled explosions, chemical reactions that produced toxic gases, and processes that generated extreme temperatures. They approached these activities with the same casual attitude Beth had displayed toward physical violence, treating potentially lethal situations as routine educational exercises. Safety is very important to us, Professor Martinez explained. As his students worked with compounds that could dissolve flesh or cause respiratory failure, we always follow proper protocols and use appropriate protective equipment. The aliens noted that the protective equipment consisted of cloth laboratory coats, plastic eyewear, and thin gloves that offered minimal protection against the hazardous materials being handled. By galactic standards, the entire laboratory would be classified as a disaster waiting to happen. As the day progressed, the aliens were exposed to additional aspects of human behavior that defied rational explanation. They learned that humans regularly consumed ethanol as a recreational drug, deliberately impairing their cognitive functions for enjoyment. They discovered that humans engaged in activities called extreme sports, where they deliberately placed themselves in life-threatening situations for the adrenaline rush. Beth mentioned her weekend plans, which included something called camping, where humans voluntarily left their protective shelters to sleep exposed to the elements. She explained that they would be surrounded by the planet's native wildlife, including creatures that could cause injury or death to unwary travelers. It's very relaxing, she said, apparently unaware of the contradiction in her statement. There's nothing like being out in nature to help you unwind from the stress of daily life. The aliens exchanged glances, beginning to understand that what humans considered stressful daily life would be classified as extreme survival conditions by most galactic species. Their idea of relaxation involved exposing themselves to even greater dangers in what they called the wilderness. As evening approached, the three exchange students retreated to their dormitory rooms to process what they had experienced. They had spent a single day observing normal human activities, and every experience had challenged their understanding of intelligent behavior and survival instincts. Roth's crystalline form continued to flicker with confusion as he tried to comprehend how a species could evolve such a casual attitude toward danger. Nira's photosynthetic patches remained pale, her system still struggling to process the oxidizing atmosphere and the stress of witnessing human recreational activities. Tam floated in his mobility suit, grateful for the protection it provided against what he was beginning to understand was a hostile environment in every possible way. They began composing their daily reports to the Galactic Education Consortium, struggling to find words that would adequately convey what they had discovered. How could they explain that humans voluntarily consumed toxins for pleasure, deliberately injured themselves for recreation, and considered exposure to deadly chemicals a normal part of education? The humans in the dormitory continued their evening routines with the same casual ease they had displayed throughout the day. They studied their lessons, socialized with friends, and prepared for sleep, apparently unaware that they were living proof that intelligent life could thrive in conditions that would challenge the most advanced survival systems in the galaxy. Tomorrow would bring new classes, new experiences, and undoubtedly new revelations about the remarkable and terrifying beings who called this deathworld home. The aliens were beginning to suspect that their semester on Earth would be far more educational than they had ever imagined. Though perhaps not in the way the exchange program had intended, the morning mist clung to the valley floor as Dr. Sarah Williams adjusted her field equipment and checked the weather forecast on her handheld device. She was a professor of environmental biology, a woman in her 40s with graying hair and the kind of weathered hands that spoke of years spent working outdoors. Her clothing was practical and designed for extended periods in what humans called nature, though the aliens were beginning to understand that human nature was unlike anything else in the galaxy. Today we're going to explore the forest ecosystem, Dr. Williams announced to her class, which included the 3 exchange students and a dozen human undergraduates. It's a perfect day for fieldwork with moderate temperatures and low wind conditions. The aliens noted that the moderate temperatures she mentioned would be considered extreme thermal stress by most galactic species, and the low wind conditions still involved air movement that could destabilize lighter beings. Yet the humans seemed perfectly comfortable in their thin clothing and exposed skin, apparently immune to environmental conditions that would require protective equipment elsewhere. In the galaxy, the forest preserve was located a short distance from the university campus, accessible by a transportation system that humans called hiking trails. These were narrow paths that wound through dense vegetation, across streams, and over terrain that would challenge all-terrain vehicles on most worlds. The humans navigated these obstacles with ease, their bipedal locomotion system proving remarkably efficient at handling irregular surfaces. "Watch your step here," Dr. Williams called out as they approached a fallen tree that blocked the path. "The bark can be slippery when wet." The aliens watched in amazement as the humans simply stepped over the obstacle, their bodies automatically adjusting balance and coordination to maintain stability on the uneven surface. What would require careful planning and specialized equipment. For most species seemed to be an automatic response for these remarkable beings. The first plant Dr. Williams showed them was something called poison ivy, a seemingly innocent green organism that produced chemical compounds designed to cause severe dermatitis in most mammals. She handled it with casual familiarity, pointing out the distinctive 3-leaf pattern while explaining how to identify and avoid it. Contact with poison ivy can cause painful blistering and itching that lasts for weeks, she explained matter-of-factly. It's one of the more common hazards when working in North American forests. Roth's crystalline form flickered with disbelief. Your world produces vegetation that attacks other organisms? Oh, it's not really an attack, Dr. Williams replied. It's a defense mechanism. The plant evolved these compounds to discourage herbivores from eating it. Unfortunately, humans happen to be sensitive to the same chemicals. The next discovery was even more disturbing. Dr. Williams led them to a cluster of mushrooms growing near the base of a large tree, explaining that some were edible while others contained toxins that could cause organ failure and death within hours of consumption. She spoke about this as if it were a normal aspect of food gathering, apparently unaware that most civilized species would never tolerate such random distribution of deadly substances in their environment. Mushroom identification is an important skill for anyone interested in foraging, she said, carefully examining the specimens. Some species are delicious and nutritious, while others can kill you. Learning to tell the difference is essential for safe harvesting. Nira's photosynthetic patches were turning pale green with stress. Your species gathers food from an environment where edible and lethal substances appear identical? Well, they're Not identical once you learn what to look for, Dr. Williams replied. Humans have been successfully foraging for thousands of years. It's actually quite safe if you know what you're doing. The horror continued as Dr. Williams began introducing them to the local wildlife. The first creature they encountered was a small, fluffy organism that humans called a squirrel. The aliens watched in fascination as this seemingly harmless animal demonstrated physical capabilities that would qualify it as a high-performance acrobat on most worlds. The squirrel scaled a vertical tree trunk with impossible agility. Its claws finding purchase on bark that appeared completely smooth. It then launched itself through the air, covering a distance several times its body length to land on a branch that barely supported its weight. The branch flexed and swayed under the impact, yet the squirrel maintained perfect balance and immediately began moving to its next destination. Squirrels are excellent climbers, Dr. Williams explained as they watched the creature perform maneuvers that would challenge professional athletes. They can survive falls from tremendous heights due to their low terminal velocity and flexible bodies. It's engaging in aerial locomotion without wings? Tam asked, his aquatic form trembling within his mobility suit. Just jumping, Dr. Williams corrected. Squirrels are adapted for arboreal life. They spend most of their time in trees, moving from branch to branch with remarkable speed and precision. The next encounter was with a domestic dog being walked by one of the human students. The aliens observed with growing concern as this creature, which registered as a predator on their sensors, interacted peacefully with its human companion. The dog's jaw structure and dental arrangement clearly indicated it was designed for tearing flesh, yet it seemed content to chase a thrown stick and accept physical contact from its human partner. You formed partnerships with carnivorous predators? Roth asked, his crystalline structure dimming with stress. Dogs aren't just carnivores, the student replied, apparently unaware of the implications. They're omnivores now, and they've been our companions for thousands of years. This is Max. He's a German shepherd, very loyal and protective. Max chose that moment to demonstrate his protective instincts by approaching the aliens with obvious curiosity, his powerful frame moving with the controlled grace of a born hunter. His nose twitched as he analyzed their scents, and his ears stood alert as he processed the sounds of their translation devices. Yet despite his predatory heritage, he showed no signs of aggression. Instead, wagging his tail in what Dr. Williams explained was a sign of friendly interest. The true revelation came when Dr. Williams began explaining Earth's food web, describing with academic precision how every organism in the forest was engaged in a constant struggle for survival. She spoke of predators and prey, parasites and hosts, competitors and symbionts, all locked in evolutionary arms races that had been running for millions of years. Take the common house cat, she said, pointing to a small feline that had appeared at the edge of the clearing. A perfect predator. Excellent night vision, retractable claws, powerful hunting instincts, and reflexes that allow them to catch prey in mid-flight. Many humans keep them as pets. The alien stared at the cat, which sat motionless except for the subtle twitching of its tail. Its eyes were fixed on something in the underbrush, and its entire body was coiled with the tension of a hunter preparing to strike. Even in its relaxed state, the creature radiated an aura of contained violence that would send most galactic species fleeing in terror. You cohabitate with apex predators voluntarily? Nira asked weakly. Cats are wonderful companions, Doctor, Williams replied. They're very independent and affectionate. Plus, they help control rodent populations around human settlements. Rodent populations? Oh yes, Earth has many species that compete with humans for resources. Rats, mice, various insects. They're quite successful at exploiting human environments, so we've learned to coexist with predators that help keep their numbers manageable. The aliens began to understand that Earth's ecosystem was not just dangerous, but actively hostile to most forms of life. Every niche was occupied by organisms that had evolved increasingly sophisticated methods of survival, defense, and predation. The entire planet seemed to be engaged in a biological arms race that had been escalating for millions of years. Dr. Williams continued her lecture, describing carnivorous plants that digested insects, parasitic organisms that controlled their hosts' behavior, and symbiotic relationships that had evolved into complex partnerships between species. She spoke of seasonal migrations that involved millions of animals crossing vast distances, territorial disputes that could result in death, and reproductive strategies that seemed designed to maximize survival in a hostile environment. The forest is a complex ecosystem, she explained, gesturing toward the dense vegetation that surrounded them. Every organism has its role, from the smallest bacteria to the largest predators. It's all interconnected in ways that maintain balance and stability. The aliens looked around at what Dr. Williams called balanced and stable, seeing instead a green hell where every organism was armed with claws, fangs, poisons, or other weapons. Trees competed for sunlight by growing taller and blocking their neighbors. Plants released chemical signals to attract defenders or warn of attacks. Animals maintained constant vigilance against predators while simultaneously hunting for prey of their own. "This is considered a peaceful environment?" Tam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Well, it's not peaceful exactly," Dr. Williams replied, "but it's natural. This is how life works on Earth. Every species has evolved to fill a specific ecological niche, and the competition between them drives innovation and adaptation." As they made their way back to the university, the aliens processed what they had learned about Earth's ecosystem. They had expected to find a world where life existed in harmony, perhaps with some mild competition for resources. Instead, they had discovered a planet where every organism was engaged in a continuous battle for survival, where death was a constant threat, and where the very air, water, and soil were filled with creatures designed to kill or be killed. The humans walked through this biological battlefield with the same casual ease they had displayed in every other dangerous situation. They identified poisonous plants, avoided predatory animals, and navigated environmental hazards with the unconscious competence of a species that had evolved in conditions that would challenge the most advanced military forces in the galaxy. That evening, as the aliens composed their reports to the Galactic Education Consortium, they struggled to find words that would adequately convey the reality of Earth's ecosystem. How could they explain that humans shared their world with organisms that would be classified as biological weapons on most civilized planets? How could they describe an environment where every step could bring contact with deadly toxins, aggressive predators, or parasitic organisms? The humans in the dormitory continued their evening routines, studying their lessons and socializing with friends, apparently unaware that they were living proof that intelligent life could not only survive, but thrive in an environment that would be classified as a hostile alien world by every other species in the galaxy. Tomorrow would bring new revelations about the remarkable and terrifying planet that had somehow produced beings capable of treating the most dangerous ecosystem in known space as their natural home. The anatomy laboratory was filled with the soft hum of holographic displays and the quiet scratch of styluses on data tablets as Dr. Rachel Kim prepared for her most challenging lecture of the semester. She was a professor of human physiology, a woman in her 30s with steady hands and the kind of precise manner that came from years of studying the intricate mechanisms of biological systems. Her specialty was comparative anatomy, and she had volunteered to teach the exchange students about human biology as part of their cultural education program. Today, we're going to examine the basic structure and function of the human body, Dr. Kim announced to her small class, which consisted of the 3 alien students and several human undergraduate volunteers who had agreed to serve as demonstration subjects. I think you'll find that humans have evolved some rather remarkable adaptations for survival. The aliens settled into their seats with varying degrees of apprehension. After 3 weeks of discovering that every aspect of human existence seemed designed to challenge the basic principles of intelligent survival, they had learned to expect the unexpected. Dr. Kim activated the holographic display system and A three-dimensional image of a human skeleton appeared in the center of the room. "Let's start with the skeletal system," Dr. Kim said, using a pointer to highlight various bones. The human skeleton is composed of 206 individual bones, connected by joints that allow for incredible flexibility and range of motion. More importantly, bones are living tissue that can repair themselves when damaged. Roth's crystalline form flickered with confusion. "Your structural framework can regenerate itself?" "Absolutely," Dr. Kim replied with obvious pride. "When a bone is fractured, the body immediately begins a complex healing process. New bone tissue grows to bridge the gap, and the repaired bone is often stronger than the original. The entire process takes about 6 to 8 weeks for most fractures." The aliens exchanged glances. Self-repairing structural systems were considered advanced technology in most galactic civilizations, yet humans carried them as standard biological equipment. Dr. Kim continued her presentation, apparently unaware that she was describing capabilities that would be envied by military engineers throughout the galaxy. "The muscular system is equally impressive," she said, replacing the skeletal display with a detailed view of human musculature. "Humans have over 600 muscles that work in coordinated groups to produce movement. But muscles don't just provide mobility, they also adapt to stress by becoming stronger and more efficient." She called forward one of the human volunteers, a young man named David who had been participating in what humans called strength training. His muscular development was clearly visible through his clothing, and Dr. Kim used him to demonstrate how human muscles could be deliberately enhanced through controlled stress. When muscles are subjected to resistance, microscopic tears occur in the muscle fibers. She explained, using the holographic display to show the cellular level damage. The body's repair mechanisms then rebuild the tissue stronger than before. This process, called hypertrophy, allows humans to continuously improve their physical capabilities throughout their lives. Nira's photosynthetic patches were flickering with stress. "Your species deliberately damages itself to become stronger?" "It's not really damage," Dr. Kim replied. "It's controlled adaptation. The human body is designed to respond to challenges by becoming more capable. This principle applies to almost every system in the body." The next revelation came when Dr. Kim began explaining the cardiovascular system. She described how the human heart could adjust its output based on physiological demands, how blood vessels could dilate or constrict to redirect circulation, and how the entire system could operate at vastly different levels of efficiency depending on circumstances. During times of stress or physical exertion, the heart rate can increase from a resting rate of 60 beats per minute to over 200 beats per minute, she explained. Blood flow is redirected from non-essential organs to muscles and the brain. The entire cardiovascular system can shift into what we call emergency mode within seconds. Tam's aquatic form was trembling within his mobility suit. "Your circulatory system has combat configurations?" "Well, we don't usually call it that," Dr. Kim said with a slight smile. "But yes, the human body has built-in responses to crisis situations. The sympathetic nervous system can trigger changes that temporarily enhance physical performance." She activated another holographic display, this one showing the complex network of nerves that connected every part of the human body to the central processing unit they called the brain. The aliens watched in amazement as Dr. Kim explained how this system could process sensory information, coordinate motor functions, and even modify its own responses based on experience. "The nervous system is perhaps the most remarkable adaptation," she said. "It can learn from experience, forming new connections and pathways that improve performance over time. It can also temporarily suppress pain responses during emergencies, allowing humans to function despite injuries that would incapacitate other species." The horror continued as Dr. Kim began discussing the immune system, describing it as a biological warfare system that could identify and eliminate foreign threats. She explained how white blood cells could distinguish between the body's own cells and invading organisms, how the system could adapt to new threats in real time, and how it maintained a memory of previous encounters that provided long-term protection. The immune system is essentially a molecular army, she said, apparently unaware of the implications of her words. It patrols the body constantly, looking for threats. When it finds something foreign, it launches a coordinated attack using chemical weapons, cellular soldiers, and even kamikaze cells that sacrifice themselves to protect the whole. Roth's crystalline structure was flickering rapidly with stress. You carry military-grade biological defense systems in your bodies? Every human does, Dr. Kim replied. It's necessary for survival. Earth has an incredible diversity of microorganisms, many of which are potentially harmful. Without immune systems, we'd be dead within days. The aliens began to understand that humans weren't just surviving on their death world, they were armed for it. Every system in their bodies seemed designed for a species that had evolved in constant conflict with their environment. Dr. Kim continued her lecture, describing additional adaptations that would be considered miraculous by galactic standards. The respiratory system can adjust to different oxygen levels and atmospheric pressures, she explained. Humans can survive at altitudes where the air is too thin for most species, and they can hold their breath for extended periods when necessary. Some humans can even train their bodies to function efficiently in low-oxygen environments. The digestive system was equally remarkable. Dr. Kim described how humans could process a wide variety of foods, including many substances that would be toxic to other species. She explained how the stomach produced acids strong enough to dissolve metal, how the liver could neutralize numerous poisons, and how the entire system could adapt to different dietary conditions. Humans are remarkably adaptable omnivores, she said. We can derive nutrition from plants, animals, and even some substances that other species would consider inedible. Our ancestors survived by being able to eat whatever was available, and modern humans retain that flexibility. But the most disturbing revelation came when Dr. Kim began discussing something called adrenaline. She explained that this hormone could temporarily enhance human physical capabilities during stress situations, increasing strength, speed, pain tolerance, and sensory acuity. The aliens watched in stunned silence as she described what was essentially a built-in combat enhancement system that activated automatically during dangerous situations. Adrenaline is released by the adrenal glands during what we call the fight or flight response. Dr. Kim explained, using the holographic display to show the hormone's effects on various body systems. Heart rate increases, blood sugar rises, muscle strength can increase by up to 30%, and pain sensitivity decreases dramatically. It's designed to help humans survive immediate threats. You have built-in combat enhancement? Tam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It's more for emergencies, Dr. Kim replied. Though some humans do seek out activities that trigger adrenaline responses for recreational purposes. Extreme sports, horror movies, roller coasters, competitive athletics. The sensation can be quite enjoyable once you get used to it. The aliens exchanged horrified glances. Not only did humans carry biological weapon systems in their bodies, but they actively sought out dangerous situations to trigger them for entertainment. Dr. Kim continued her lecture, apparently unaware that she was describing capabilities that would be restricted to elite military units in most galactic civilizations. The endocrine system produces dozens of hormones that regulate everything from growth to reproduction to stress responses, she said. Humans can adapt to extreme temperatures, high-stress environments, and even life-threatening situations by adjusting hormone production. The system is incredibly flexible and responsive. Dr. Kim then began discussing human reproduction and child-rearing, explaining how the species had evolved elaborate systems for protecting and nurturing their offspring. She described pregnancy as a process where humans literally grew new individuals inside their bodies, supporting them with their own biological resources for 9 months before birth. Human reproduction requires enormous investment from the parents, she explained. Pregnancy is metabolically expensive, childbirth is dangerous, and human infants are born in an extremely vulnerable state. They require years of intensive care and protection before they can survive independently. Roth's crystalline form was flickering with confusion. Your species produces offspring in a hostile environment and then dedicates years of your lives to protecting them? Of course, Dr. Kim replied, looking puzzled by the question. What else would we do? Children are precious. Every human culture has developed complex systems for protecting and educating young people. We invest enormous resources in their development because they represent our future. The aliens began to understand something that was perhaps even more remarkable than human physical adaptations. This species had evolved such powerful protective instincts that they would voluntarily inhabit a death world rather than abandon their young. Their entire civilization was built around the concept of making their hostile environment safe enough for the next generation to survive and thrive. Dr. Kim continued her presentation, describing the human brain as a biological computer, capable of learning, reasoning, and solving complex problems. She explained how humans could form emotional bonds that lasted decades, how they could sacrifice their own welfare for the benefit of others, and how they had developed communication systems that allowed them to share knowledge across generations. The human brain is perhaps our greatest adaptation, she said. It allows us to learn from experience, plan for the future, and work together to solve problems that would be impossible for individuals to handle alone. Cooperation and communication are what make human civilization possible. The aliens watched as Dr. Kim demonstrated human cognitive flexibility by having the student volunteers solve various puzzles and challenges. The humans approached each problem with creative thinking, collaborative effort, and persistent determination. When they encountered obstacles, they simply adapted their strategies and tried again until they found solutions. Humans are remarkably resilient problem solvers, Dr. Kim observed. We don't give up easily, and we're excellent at finding alternative approaches when our first attempts fail. This mental flexibility is probably why we've been so successful at surviving in challenging environments. As the lecture continued, the aliens learned about human sensory systems that could function in a wide range of conditions, healing mechanisms that could repair everything from minor cuts to major trauma, and metabolic processes that could adjust to different food sources and environmental stresses. Every system seemed designed for a species that had evolved to thrive in conditions that would challenge the most advanced technology in the galaxy. The final revelation came when Dr. Kim began discussing human longevity and aging. She explained that humans could maintain their physical and mental capabilities for decades, continuing to learn and adapt throughout their lives. Some humans remained active and productive well into their hundreds, accumulating knowledge and experience that made them valuable resources for their communities. Human lifespan has been increasing steadily as we've learned to manage our environment and health, she said. Many humans now live long enough to see multiple generations of their descendants, allowing them to pass on knowledge and experience that might otherwise be lost. The aliens realized they were looking at something unprecedented in galactic history. These beings had not only survived on a world that would challenge advanced military forces, but they had built a civilization based on protecting their young, sharing knowledge and continuously improving their capabilities. They were not just survivors, they were optimizers who turned every challenge into an opportunity for growth. As the lecture ended and the human students began filing out of the classroom, the three exchange students remained in their seats, struggling to process what they had learned. They had come to Earth expecting to study a primitive species living on a standard habitable world. Instead, they had discovered beings who carried biological weapon systems, combat enhancement capabilities, and adaptive mechanisms that would be considered miraculous by most galactic civilizations. Dr. Kim approached them as they sat in stunned silence. I hope the lecture was helpful, she said with genuine concern. I know human biology can seem quite complex to a species that evolved in different environments. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. The aliens looked at this soft-spoken professor who had just described a species that was essentially a collection of biological weapon systems wrapped in protective skin, and realized that she genuinely considered humans to be normal. What they saw as terrifying adaptations for survival in a hostile universe, she saw as standard equipment for intelligent life. That night, as they prepared their reports to the Galactic Education Consortium, each of them struggled to find words that would adequately convey what they had discovered. How could they explain that humans were not just survivors, but that they had evolved capabilities that surpassed the most advanced military enhancements available to galactic civilization? The humans in the dormitory continued their evening routines with the same casual ease they had displayed throughout their time on Earth, apparently unaware that they were living proof that life could not only survive, but thrive in conditions that would challenge every principle of intelligent behavior known to the galaxy. The emergency sirens began wailing at 0347 hours local time, their piercing notes cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like a blade through silence. In most galactic civilizations, such alarms would signal imminent evacuation protocols, the approach of hostile forces, or catastrophic system failures requiring immediate emergency response. On Earth, however, the three alien exchange students would soon learn that these sirens meant something entirely different. Dr. Patricia Hayes was already in the university's Emergency Operations Center when the alerts began cascading across her monitoring systems. As the director of campus safety and emergency management, she had seen her share of crisis situations. But the current solar storm was shaping up to be one of the most significant in recent memory. The magnetic disturbance readings were off the charts, and the radiation levels would have triggered planetary evacuation orders on most civilized worlds. Solar flare magnitude X 9.3, duration approximately 6 hours. Her assistant reported from the communications console. Radiation spike is within acceptable parameters for standard emergency protocols. All systems are responding normally to the enhanced particle bombardment. Dr. Hayes nodded and began implementing what humans called their standard emergency procedures. Across the planet, similar scenes were playing out as Earth's technological infrastructure automatically adapted to conditions that would cripple most galactic communication networks and computational systems. Satellite arrays adjusted their orientation to minimize radiation exposure, power grids rerouted through hardened pathways, and communication systems switched to backup frequencies. The three alien students had been awakened by the emergency signals and were huddled in their dormitory common room, frantically trying to contact their respective embassy ships to arrange emergency evacuation. They had learned enough about Earth to know that any emergency significant enough to trigger planetary alert systems would likely be fatal to most galactic species. Beth Rodriguez appeared in the doorway wearing casual clothing and carrying what appeared to be a hot beverage, her manner calm and completely at odds with the continuing emergency sirens. She noticed the aliens' obvious distress and immediately moved to reassure them, apparently unaware that they were experiencing what most species would consider pre-death terror. "Good morning, everyone," she said cheerfully, settling into one of the comfortable chairs. "I see you're up early. The aurora displays should be spectacular tonight. Are you planning to watch them?" Roth's crystalline form was flickering erratically with stress. "Aurora displays? Are you not concerned about the emergency evacuation protocols?" "Evacuation?" Beth looked genuinely puzzled. "Oh, you mean the solar storm warnings. Those aren't evacuation alerts. They're just letting people know about possible communication disruptions and recommending that sensitive electronic equipment be protected. It's really not that serious." The aliens stared at her in disbelief. The radiation levels they were detecting would sterilize most inhabited worlds. Yet this human was discussing the phenomenon as if it were a minor inconvenience. Beth continued sipping her beverage, apparently oblivious to the fact that stellar radiation was bombarding the planet at levels that would require emergency shielding on most galactic installations. "But surely the radiation exposure poses significant risks?" Tam asked, his aquatic form trembling within his mobility suit. "Well, there might be some minor communication interference," Beth replied, "and people in high-altitude aircraft might receive slightly elevated radiation doses, but nothing dangerous." Earth's magnetic field deflects most of the harmful particles, and our atmosphere absorbs the rest. It's actually quite beautiful when you see the aurora formations. Dr. Hayes arrived at the dormitory an hour later to conduct a routine safety briefing, a standard procedure during significant space weather events. She found the aliens in various states of panic while the human students were going about their normal morning routines, many of them expressing excitement about the promised aurora displays. I understand you have some concerns about the current solar activity, Dr. Hayes said, settling down to address the exchange students. This is actually a fairly routine space weather event. We get these every few years, and our systems are designed to handle them automatically. She activated a portable display unit and began showing them data from Earth's network of monitoring stations. The readings showed radiation levels that would trigger immediate evacuation procedures on most galactic worlds, magnetic field fluctuations that would cripple standard communication systems, and particle bombardment that would overwhelm most protective technologies. As you can see, we're well within normal parameters for a major solar storm, Dr. Hayes explained, pointing to charts that the aliens found deeply disturbing. Our infrastructure is hardened against these events, and our biological shielding is more than adequate for the radiation levels we're experiencing. Neera's photosynthetic patches were flickering with stress. Biological shielding? Earth's atmosphere and magnetic field, Dr. Hayes clarified. Plus, humans have natural resistance to radiation that's quite remarkable compared to most species. We evolved on a planet with an active star and a thin ozone layer, so we developed excellent cellular repair mechanisms and radiation tolerance. The aliens began to understand that what they were witnessing was not an emergency response to a catastrophic event, but rather a routine demonstration of how humans dealt with conditions that would be considered warfare-level threats by most galactic civilizations. Earth's entire technological and biological infrastructure was designed to operate normally in an environment that would require the most advanced military-grade protection systems available to other species. As the day progressed, the aliens observed humans going about their normal activities with complete disregard for the ongoing stellar bombardment. Students attended classes, professors conducted lectures, and campus maintenance crews continued their routine work. The only visible changes were the additional displays, showing aurora forecasts and the excited conversations about planned viewing parties. It's been over 3 years since we had aurora visible this far south, one student mentioned enthusiastically. My astronomy club is setting up telescopes on the roof tonight. You should join us. It's going to be amazing. The aliens watched in fascination as humans began making plans to deliberately expose themselves to the direct effects of stellar radiation for recreational purposes. What would be considered suicidal behavior by most galactic species was being treated as a special entertainment opportunity that evening. Hundreds of humans gathered on rooftops, in parks, and in open areas to watch the aurora displays paint the sky in brilliant colors. The aliens observed from behind the protective barriers of their dormitory, watching through filtered windows as humans stood exposed to radiation levels that would require emergency medical treatment for most species. The aurora itself was admittedly beautiful, sheets of green, blue, and red light dancing across the night sky as charged particles from the solar storm interacted with Earth's magnetic field. But the aliens couldn't appreciate the aesthetic value while watching an entire species deliberately expose itself to what they considered a lethal cosmic phenomenon. Absolutely gorgeous tonight, Beth said, returning from the viewing party with her skin glowing slightly from the radiation exposure. The colors were incredible and the activity level was off the charts. Did you see the red aurora at the zenith? That indicates some really high-energy particle interactions. The aliens realized they were witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. These humans didn't just survive in conditions that would challenge advanced military technology. They had made those conditions into their natural environment. What other species would consider emergency crisis management, humans considered routine weather phenomena. Over the following days, as the solar storm gradually subsided, The aliens observed how Earth systems automatically returned to normal operations. The technological infrastructure that had seamlessly adapted to stellar radiation bombardment simply adjusted back to standard configurations. The humans who had been exposed to radiation levels that would hospitalize most species showed no signs of adverse effects and continued their normal activities. The final revelation came when Professor Allen approached them during their last week of the exchange program. He had been monitoring their adjustment to Earth and wanted to discuss their experiences before they returned to their homeworlds. "I hope your time here has been educational," he said, settling into a chair in the faculty lounge. "I know Earth can seem rather intense to species that evolved in more stable environments. We sometimes forget how unusual our world appears to others." Roth's crystalline form flickered with something that might have been amusement. "Professor Allen, we have learned much about humanity during our stay, perhaps more than we expected." "Oh, good," Allen replied. "That's exactly what the exchange program is designed to accomplish: cultural understanding through direct experience. I hope you'll share what you've learned with your own people." The aliens exchanged glances, realizing that they would indeed be sharing what they had learned, though perhaps not in the way Allen expected. They had come to Earth anticipating study of a primitive species on a standard habitable world. Instead, they had discovered beings who had evolved capabilities that surpassed the most advanced military enhancements available to galactic civilization. "We will certainly share our observations," Nira said carefully, "though we suspect our governments may find some of our reports difficult to believe." "Reality often seems stranger than fiction," Allen agreed. "That's part of what makes cultural exchange so valuable. We all have different perspectives based on our experiences." As their departure day approached, the three exchange students prepared their final reports to the Galactic Education Consortium. They had witnessed humans surviving conditions that would eliminate most known life forms, thriving in an environment that would be classified as a military testing ground, and treating challenges that would require emergency response protocols as normal aspects of daily life. More importantly, they had observed a species that had channeled the survival mechanisms required by their hostile environment into protective instincts that extended to other beings. Humans didn't just survive on their death world, they had built a civilization dedicated to making that world safe for others. When the Emergency Council of the Galactic Education Consortium received their reports 3 months later, the response was swift and unanimous. Earth was immediately reclassified from a developing world to a fortress planet, and humans were designated as a species of exceptional capability and potential value to galactic security. 6 months after that, when the destroyer fleet from the Andromeda Spiral arrived to demand the galaxy's surrender, the Emergency Council's first vote was unanimous. The message sent to Earth was simple and direct: "We need your help." The humans' response was equally direct: "When do we start?" The rest, as they say, became galactic legend.